Ethan Carter stood in his kitchen on a Monday morning that felt anything but ordinary. The sunlight, usually a welcome guest streaming through the white lace curtains, seemed to cast long, unsettling shadows across the oak table. Even the comforting aroma of freshly brewed coffee, mingling with the familiar scent of buttered toast, couldn't dispel the growing sense of dread that tightened in his chest. John moved through the familiar steps of his morning routine, a ritual that typically brought a measure of peace. But today, everything felt off-kilter, a discordant note in the symphony of his day. His gaze fell on his 6-year-old son, Leo. Leo sat slumped in his chair, a picture of dejection. His khaki shorts were rumpled, his usually bright eyes fixed on some unseen point on the floor. The colorful loops in his cereal bowl remained untouched, slowly surrendering to the milk, becoming a soggy, disheartening mess. Ethan's heart ached as he noticed the small fingers nervously fidgeting with the edge of his placemat, a new and deeply worrying habit that had taken root in recent weeks. "Not hungry this morning, sweetheart?" Ethan asked, his voice strained despite his efforts to keep it light, the concern inside him a heavy, suffocating weight. Leo pushed the bowl away with such deliberate, heartbreaking slowness that Ethan couldn't ignore the gesture. "I don't want to go to school today," he mumbled, his voice barely a whisper, almost lost beneath the refrigerator's soft hum. Ethan felt a familiar, sharp pang of worry. This had become a chilling pattern. The profound reluctance, the complete loss of appetite, the dark, bruised shadows under eyes that should have sparkled with the innocent joy of childhood. Most concerning were the nightmares that had him waking up screaming, echoing through the silent house 3 nights this week, and the bedwetting that had mysteriously, disturbingly, returned after being resolved for nearly 2 years. It felt like a regression, a stripping away of hard-won milestones, leaving his son vulnerable and afraid. Ethan crouched beside Leo's chair, bringing himself to his son's level, face etched with a father's deep-seated fear. The cruel morning light highlighted the worry lines that had begun to form around his eyes, etched there in just the last month. "Honey, what's wrong?" Ethan asked softly, resting his hand on his son's small, trembling shoulder. "You used to love school. Is someone being mean to you? Are the lessons too hard?" Leo's shoulders rose in a small, defeated shrug as he steadfastly avoided his father's gaze, his eyes fixed with intense determination on the worn surface of the tabletop. "I just don't feel good," he mumbled, picking compulsively at a small scratch in the wooden surface. His voice was so quiet, so fragile, that Ethan had to lean closer, straining to hear him over the ambient kitchen sounds. Sophia Carter lowered her newspaper with a sharp rustle, checking her watch before taking a final, hurried swig of coffee. Her crisp button-down shirt and neatly knotted tie seemed starkly out of place in the casual, intimate setting of the breakfast table. "We've been through this, Ethan," she said with a barely concealed sigh of impatience. "It's just adjustment difficulties with his new teacher. Mrs. Peterson can be strict, but she's good. All the parents say so." She folded her newspaper with swift, precise movements, tucking it efficiently under her arm. Ethan straightened up, running a hand through his hair, a gesture of frustration and helplessness. But what about the nightmares? The bedwetting that started 3 weeks ago, right after... Sophia cut him off with a dismissive wave of her hand, already reaching for her sleek briefcase propped against the counter, the leather cool and unyielding. "All kids go through phases. Remember how he was afraid of the dark last year? We got him that nightlight, and after a week, he was fine." The finality in her tone was absolute, slamming the door on the conversation before it had even truly begun. Ethan pressed his lips together, a bitter taste in his mouth, holding back the torrent of words he desperately wanted to say. This felt different. The fear of the dark, while difficult, had felt understandable, a common hurdle of childhood. But this progressive withdrawal, this chilling, growing dread of school, it felt fundamentally wrong, like a screaming warning bell in his soul that he wouldn't silence. Leo excused himself quietly, sliding off his chair with none of his usual morning energy, his movements slow and heavy. Ethan watched him shuffle down the hallway toward his bedroom. His small shoulders slumped forward as if burdened by an invisible, crushing weight. The morning light, once warm and inviting, now cast long, ominous shadows behind him as he disappeared into his room to retrieve his backpack. And Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that those shadows seemed to cling to him, wrapping around him in a way that made his heart ache with a deep, profound sorrow. He remained in the doorway, a silent sentinel, watching the empty hallway long after Leo had gone, his paternal instincts screaming, a primal, insistent voice, that something was terribly wrong. He just couldn't identify what it was yet, a terrifying uncertainty that gnawed at him. Ethan walked Leo to the bus stop, the crisp morning air doing little to clear the heavy anxiety that hung between them. Their breath formed small, fleeting clouds, ephemeral against the backdrop of a sky that was a clear, brilliant blue, a stark, almost cruel contrast to the turmoil churning within his son. Other parents and children gathered at the corner, their cheerful morning chatter creating a backdrop of normalcy that only served to emphasize Leo's profound, unnatural silence. Ethan glanced down, a fresh wave of alarm washing over him as he noticed Leo's hands trembling, small white-knuckled fists clutching his red lunchbox as if it were a lifeline. His face was unnaturally pale, making his freckles stand out starkly against his skin, and his forehead was creased with worry lines that seemed grotesquely out of place, a map of adult anxieties etched onto a 6-year-old's face. Ethan felt his own anxiety ratcheting up another notch, a frantic drumbeat in his chest. "Are you cold, honey?" he asked, though he knew the autumn morning wasn't chilly enough to cause such violent trembling. Leo shook his head mutely, his eyes fixed on the cracked pavement of the sidewalk, refusing to meet his father's gaze. His knuckles were bone white around the handle of his lunchbox, a testament to the fear gripping him. The familiar rumble of an approaching engine drew Ethan's attention to the street, a sound that usually brought reassurance, but now felt tinged with apprehension. The yellow school bus rounded the corner, its bright color a cheerful contrast to the bare skeletal branches of the autumn trees lining the street. The hydraulic brakes hissed loudly, a mechanical sigh, as the massive vehicle stopped in front of the waiting families. Ethan felt Leo's entire small body stiffen beside him, his hands suddenly clamping around Ethan's with surprising, desperate strength, his palm clammy and cold against his father's skin. The doors folded open with a mechanical wheeze, revealing Mr. Buford, the bus driver. He was a heavy-set man, his balding head gleaming under the bus's interior lights. His blue uniform shirt stretched taut across his broad chest, a laminated name badge pinned at his pocket. "Good morning, boys and girls," Buford called out, his voice booming in the quiet morning air, a forced, theatrical cheerfulness. His round face broke into a wide, practiced smile as he greeted the children, his appearance the very picture of a friendly, grandfatherly neighborhood bus driver. A high-pitched, strangled sound escaped Kevin's throat, startling Ethan, a sound of pure, unadulterated terror. He looked down just as his son erupted into hysterical, gut-wrenching crying, his face contorted instantly, tears streaming down his cheeks in hot, relentless rivers as he stumbled backward away from the bus door. "I don't want to go. Please, Daddy, please don't make me," Kevin screamed, his voice cracking, splintering with raw panic. He pulled away from Ethan with such desperate force that he momentarily lost his grip on him. He darted toward the bus, a strange, contradictory impulse, but stopped abruptly at the steps, clinging to the cold metal handrail of the entrance, his body language a confusing, heartbreaking mix of desperate avoidance and terrified compliance. The other parents turned to stare, their conversations halting abruptly, replaced by an uncomfortable, scrutinizing silence. Ethan caught several exchanged glances, some sympathetic, their faces etched with understanding, others clearly judgmental, their expressions hardening with disapproval. A hot, humiliating flush of embarrassment crept up his neck as he hurried to Kevin's side, his only focus his trembling son. Ethan knelt beside Kevin, placing his hands gently on his shoulders, trying to ground him, to soothe the fear radiating from him. "Kevin, honey, what's wrong?" he asked, struggling to keep his voice steady, a calm anchor in the storm of his son's panic. "You need to go to school. All your friends are waiting for you inside." He wiped tears from his cheeks with his thumb, acutely, painfully aware of the audience they had attracted, the weight of their gaze heavy upon them. Mr. Buford leaned forward in his seat, his massive frame filling the driver's area, a picture of benevolent concern. His expression was sympathetic, almost too much so, practiced in its understanding, honed by countless similar mornings. "This happens sometimes," he said with easy, confident reassurance. "First grade jitters. I think I know just the thing." He reached into his shirt pocket, pulling out 2 brightly wrapped candies, extending them on his open palm, the wrappers glistening in the morning light. "Special treats for brave boys who ride my bus. And one for Mom, too, for being so patient." Buford held out one candy to Kevin, whose crying had reduced to shaky, hiccuping sobs at the sight of the colorful wrapper, his attention momentarily diverted by the bright offering. The bus driver's voice shifted, taking on a gentler, almost conspiratorial tone. "I keep these for situations just like this," he explained to Ethan with a quick, knowing wink. "Works every time." Kevin hesitated, his small body still trembling, then slowly, tentatively, reached for the candy, his small fingers carefully avoiding any contact with Buford's large hand, a subtle, telling movement that Ethan noted subconsciously. His sobs quieted to occasional hiccups as he stared at the bright wrapper. His focus narrowed to the sugary temptation. "And if you get on the bus now," Buford continued, his voice maintaining that same gentle, persuasive tone, "I'll have another one waiting for you after school. How does that sound, buddy?" Ethan watched, a knot of unease tightening in his stomach, as Kevin's fierce resistance visibly, unsettlingly, faded. His focus was entirely, utterly captured by the candy in his hand. The abrupt, almost instantaneous change in his demeanor was disorienting, chilling, from abject terror to tentative, candy-induced acceptance in mere seconds. A fragile, fleeting sense of relief flooded through Ethan, quickly followed by a wave of suspicion, as he accepted the offered candy with a strained, grateful smile. "Thank you, Mr. Buford. That's very kind," he said, slipping the candy into his jacket pocket, its weight suddenly feeling significant, heavy with unspoken implications. "Please call me Buford," he replied with a warm, practiced smile that didn't quite reach his eyes, leaving them cold and distant. "I've been driving this route for 20 years. I know how to handle the little ones." Something in his tone, perhaps the practiced ease, the unsettling familiarity, or the coldness in his eyes, made Ethan deeply uncomfortable, a prickling sensation on the back of his neck. But he dismissed the feeling, pushing it down, attributing it to gratitude for his intervention in what could have been a much more difficult, prolonged morning meltdown. Kevin reluctantly climbed the steps onto the bus, his movements slow and heavy, casting one last, lingering glance back at Ethan. His eyes were still red-rimmed, holding a mixture of weary resignation and something else, something indefinable that Ethan couldn't quite identify, a flicker of fear or perhaps something darker. The doors closed with a definitive hiss, sealing his son inside, and Ethan raised his hand in a weak, reassuring wave as the bus pulled away. He stood watching, a solitary figure on the sidewalk, until the bright yellow vehicle disappeared around the corner, swallowed by the stream of morning traffic. The candy felt strangely, ominously heavy in his pocket, its small size belying the weight of the uneasy feeling that settled in his stomach, a cold, coiling serpent. He tried to dismiss it, attributing it to the lingering embarrassment from Kevin's public display of distress. But the feeling persisted, a low thrum of unease beneath his skin. Ethan remained rooted to the spot long after the other parents had dispersed, swallowed by their daily routines, staring down the now empty street as if it might miraculously offer answers to the questions swirling, unbidden, in his mind. The weight of the candy in his pocket seemed disproportionate to its actual size, a tangible, physical manifestation of his growing discomfort, his escalating fear. Something felt profoundly, terrifyingly wrong, but he couldn't articulate what it was, not even to himself. A movement at the edge of his vision snagged his attention. Isabella Garcia still stood at the corner, a solitary figure, her gaze fixed on the distant point where the bus had vanished. Unlike the other parents who had quickly dispersed, Isabella seemed frozen in the moment, her expression troubled, a mirror of Ethan's own unease. Ethan hesitated, then approached her cautiously. They had exchanged pleasantries at school events and PTA meetings, shared polite smiles and small talk, but had never really had a substantial conversation. Isabella was always impeccably dressed, her appearance perfectly put together, but today Ethan noticed small, disquieting details that seemed off. A missing earring, a faint coffee stain on her otherwise crisp blouse, dark circles under her eyes partially hidden by a thick layer of concealer. "Everything okay?" Ethan asked, his voice gentle, startling Isabella out of her reverie. Isabella turned, momentarily confused, her eyes widening slightly before she forced a smile that didn't reach them, leaving them blank and haunted. "Oh, Ethan, right? Just thinking," she said, her voice a little strained, shifting her weight from one foot to another, a nervous, restless movement. She glanced at her watch, an automatic gesture that seemed more habit than necessity, her fingers fiddling with the strap. "Your son, Mateo, is in Kevin's class, right?" Ethan ventured, trying to place the quiet, dark-haired boy he'd seen occasionally at school functions. Isabella nodded, tucking a stray strand of hair behind her ear, a gesture of nervous tidiness. "Yes, they sit at the same table. Mrs. Peterson mentioned they work well together on art projects." She glanced at her watch again, clearly signaling her desire to end the conversation, to escape. Ethan took a deep breath, the crisp morning air filling his lungs, a silent fortification. He decided to take a chance, to push past the social boundaries. "Has Mateo been acting differently lately?" he asked, keeping his tone as casual as possible, even as his heart hammered against his ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage, at his own boldness, the audacity of the question. The effect was immediate, shattering Isabella's carefully constructed composure. Her forced smile vanished, replaced by an expression of such raw, unfiltered concern, such profound vulnerability, that Ethan almost took a step back. "He's been so quiet lately," Isabella admitted, her voice dropping to a hushed whisper as if sharing a shameful secret. "He used to be such a chatterbox. We joked that we couldn't get him to stop talking at dinner, his stories spilling out in a never-ending stream. But now he barely speaks, just pushes his food around his plate." She sighed heavily, a sound of deep weariness, seeming relieved, paradoxically, to finally voice her anxieties, to share the burden. "And his grades are dropping. His teacher called me about it yesterday. He's always been good at math, loves numbers, but now." She trailed off, shaking her head, the unspoken words hanging heavy in the air between them. Ethan felt a chill, a cold, creeping dread, despite the morning warmth. The similarities to Kevin's behavior were too striking, too terrifying to ignore. The withdrawal, the sudden, inexplicable change in academic performance, the overwhelming anxiety. "Does he?" Ethan hesitated, carefully, deliberately formulating his next question, choosing his words with painful precision. "Does he ever say he doesn't want to go to school? Or have nightmares?" Isabella's eyes widened slightly, a flicker of recognition, of shared horror. "Both, actually," she confirmed, her voice barely audible. "He's been having bad dreams. Wakes up crying, screaming sometimes, and getting him on the bus is becoming a daily battle, a tug-of-war of wills and fear." She paused, her gaze sharp and searching, studying Ethan's face. "Why? Is Kevin going through something similar?" Ethan offered a reassuring smile he didn't feel, a flimsy shield against the rising tide of panic. "They're just kids growing up," he said, the words sounding hollow, unconvincing even to his own ears. "Kevin throws tantrums about school, too. I think they all go through these phases," he added, trying desperately to convince himself as much as Isabella. The explanation felt utterly inadequate, a flimsy curtain hiding a monstrous reality, even as he spoke it. But he didn't know what else to say, didn't know how to voice the terrifying suspicions forming in his mind. Isabella nodded quickly, grasping at the simple explanation, seeming momentarily relieved. "You're probably right. I'm overthinking things. My husband says I worry too much," she said with a self-deprecating laugh that held little humor, a brittle, fragile sound. "He thinks I'm being paranoid, but mothers know when something's wrong, don't they?" Ethan nodded, a silent, profound understanding passing between them, a shared recognition of a primal, instinctual bond, a knowing that transcended logic and reason. Isabella checked her watch one final time, this time with genuine, urgent concern. "I should get going. I have a meeting in 20 minutes. Thanks for the chat, Ethan. It's good to know I'm not the only one dealing with whatever this is." "Of course," Ethan replied, his mind already racing ahead, formulating a plan. "Maybe we can get the boys together for play date sometime. Might help them both." "I'd like that," Isabella said with a genuine smile, the first he had seen on her face that morning, a small beacon of shared hope in the gathering darkness. She handed Ethan her phone, and they quickly exchanged numbers, a silent promise of future connection and shared worry, before parting ways, each walking away with a heavier burden than before. As Ethan walked back to his house, his mind circled relentlessly, obsessively, around the chilling coincidence. Two boys on the same bus route, in the same class, both suddenly, inexplicably afraid of school, both experiencing terrifying nightmares and regressive behaviors, and both mysteriously, consistently, late to class according to what Isabella had mentioned about the teacher's call. Ethan tried desperately to dismiss the connections, to rationalize them away, as he approached his front door, inserting his key into the lock with perhaps more force than necessary, the metal cold and unforgiving in his trembling hand. Coincidences happen all the time, he told himself, especially with children the same age going through similar developmental stages, navigating the turbulent waters of growing up. But the weight of the candy in his pocket felt heavier than before, a small but insistent, undeniable reminder that sometimes what looked like a simple coincidence was actually a terrifying pattern waiting to be recognized, a puzzle piece clicking into place, revealing a horrifying picture. Ethan returned home to find Sophia preparing to leave for work, her keys jingling impatiently in her hand as she patted her pockets for her wallet and phone, a familiar, mundane ritual. The sheer normality of the scene, his wife going through her usual daily routine, felt starkly, jarringly at odds with the turbulent, uneased churning, twisting, inside him. He held up the candy Buford had given him, the bright wrapper catching the kitchen light, a small, innocuous object suddenly imbued with a sinister significance. "Kevin had another meltdown at the bus stop," he said, his voice tight with suppressed emotion, leaning against the kitchen counter for support, the solid surface a welcome anchor in the swirling chaos of his thoughts, support he hadn't realized he needed until that very moment. Sophia raised an eyebrow, a flicker of exasperation crossing her face, pausing in her hurried morning routine. "Again? That's the third time this week," she sighed, running a hand through her neatly combed hair, a gesture of weary frustration. "What was it this time?" "Same as before. Crying, begging not to get on the bus," Ethan replied, his voice flat, drained of emotion. He placed the candy on the counter, watching with detached observation as Sophia picked it up, turning it over in her hands with mild, detached curiosity. "Buford gave you this?" Sophia asked, examining the wrapper, a faint smile spreading across her face, softening her features momentarily. "Good old Buford. He was driving that route when we were kids, remember? He's practically a neighborhood institution. Everyone knows him." She tossed the candy back onto the counter with casual, careless dismissal, her attention already shifting to her phone. Ethan watched the small, brightly wrapped sweet bounce once, a tiny, insignificant object, before settling on the cold granite surface. "Did you ever find him odd?" he asked carefully, the word hanging in the air between them. Sophia laughed, a short, dismissive sound, shaking her head. Buford? No way. He's just one of those career bus drivers, salt-of-the-earth type. Been doing it forever. He used to let us sit in the driver's seat sometimes after the route was done, show us how the doors worked. She grabbed her travel mug, taking a final sip before securing the lid, her mind clearly already at the office. Why? Did he say something? Ethan hesitated, the words lodging in his throat, unsure how to articulate the vague, terrifying unease that had taken root in his gut. Instead, he shifted the conversation slightly, a strategic move. Mrs. Peterson called yesterday. Kevin was late again. That's the 4th time this month. Sophia shrugged, grabbing her keys from the hook by the door, her movements brisk and efficient. Probably just dawdling. You know how he gets distracted, she replied, checking her watch, her impatience palpable. Sees a bug or a cool rock, and everything else disappears from his mind. But the nightmares, Sophia. Ethan pressed, following her toward the door, his voice gaining urgency. The bedwetting. And I just talked to Isabella Garcia at the bus stop. Her son, Mateo, is having issues too. He's withdrawn, and his grades are dropping. Both boys ride the same bus, and both have been late to class multiple times this month. Sophia sighed, a sound of exasperation, turning to face him with an expression that mixed impatience with a weary, dismissive condescension. See? It's just the age. He's not the only one going through this. First grade is an adjustment for all of them, she said dismissively, waving away his concerns as if they were bothersome insects. Kids go through phases. Remember how anxious you were about everything when you were little? Your mom told me all about it. You're transferring your own childhood anxieties to our son, Ethan. Ethan felt his cheeks flush with a hot, stinging wave of anger and embarrassment. This isn't about me, Sophia, he insisted, his voice rising, cracking with frustration. This is about Kevin and the fact that something is clearly, undeniably wrong. 6-year-olds don't just start having night terrors out of nowhere. They don't regress to bedwetting without a reason. So what are you suggesting, Ethan? Sophia challenged, her own frustration evident, her voice sharp and accusatory. That the school is somehow traumatizing him? That his teacher, who comes with glowing recommendations, is secretly terrorizing the children? Or maybe it's the cafeteria food that's giving him nightmares. I don't know what it is, Sophia. Ethan exclaimed, throwing his hands up in a gesture of helplessness and desperation. But a parent knows when something's wrong with their child, and something is definitely, terrifyingly wrong with Kevin. Sophia checked her watch again, more pointedly, a clear signal of the dwindling time and her growing impatience. You treat him like he's still a toddler, Ethan. He has to grow up sometime. First grade comes with expectations. Homework, sitting still, following directions. Not every child adjusts at the same pace. First graders shouldn't have pressures that give them nightmares. Sophia. Ethan countered, his voice rising, fueled by a potent mixture of fear and righteous anger. And it can't be a coincidence that Mateo is having problems too. Both boys on the same bus route. If there are issues at school, we need to address them, to confront them, not dismiss them because they're inconvenient to acknowledge. Sophia's jaw tightened, her expression hardening, as she checked her watch a 3rd time, the small tick-tock of the segundos a relentless reminder of her schedule. I'm late. We'll talk about this tonight, she said, her tone cold and final, making it abundantly clear that the conversation, for her, was unequivocally over. She leaned in to kiss his cheek, the gesture automatic and perfunctory, a hollow imitation of affection, before heading out the door, the click of her heels on the tile floor echoing in the sudden silence. The sound of her car starting up and pulling away left Ethan in a silence that seemed to amplify his thoughts, to make the swirling anxieties in his mind deafening, rather than quiet them. He paced the kitchen, a caged animal, his mind racing, spinning. Sophia's dismissal stung, a sharp, painful wound, but paradoxically, it also hardened his resolve, solidifying his determination. If she wouldn't take Kevin's behavior seriously, if she refused to see the warning signs, then he would have to trust his own instincts, to follow the path they illuminated, no matter where it led. The candy on the counter caught his eye again, a small, brightly colored beacon of his fear, and he paused, picking it up, turning it over in his hand. Why would a bus driver, a man entrusted with the safety of children, carry sweets for children, for situations just like this? How often did this happen? How many children had melted down on Buford's bus, their fears soothed, so easily, by a simple piece of candy? The candy no longer seemed like a kind, harmless gesture, a simple act of comfort, but something far more calculated, something sinister, a tool, perhaps a bribe, a means of control. Ethan turned the small sweet over in his hand, his mind connecting dots he hadn't seen before, a terrifying picture beginning to emerge. The late arrivals to school, which both Kevin and Mateo experienced. The nightmares, vivid and terrifying. The sudden, overwhelming fear of school. No, not school, he realized with growing, chilling clarity. The fear wasn't about school itself. It was about the journey to get there, the liminal space between home and safety, the yellow bus, a symbol of security turned sinister. Something didn't add up, a dark equation with missing variables, and Ethan was determined, utterly resolved, to find out what it was, to uncover the truth, no matter the cost. Ethan decided to take immediate action, the time for fear and doubt having passed. Grabbing his keys and stepping out the door, his heart pounding with a mixture of fear and adrenaline, he couldn't ignore his instincts any longer. Something was terribly wrong, and he needed answers, needed them now. The drive to Westfield Elementary took only 10 minutes, the familiar route passing by neighborhood parks and small businesses, a landscape of comforting normalcy that felt strangely alien today. He rehearsed what he'd say to the principal, trying desperately to sound concerned but not accusatory, to be taken seriously, not dismissed as an overanxious parent. His hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles turned white as he mentally sorted through the confusing, terrifying pieces of the puzzle. Kevin's unsettling behavior, the bus driver's strange candy, his unsettling conversation with Isabella. He wouldn't be dismissed or patronized this time, he vowed silently. His child's well-being, the safety of his son, was at stake, and nothing else mattered. The school secretary looked up as Ethan entered the front office, her expression one of polite inquiry. The air hung heavy with the familiar, comforting smell of disinfectant and children's art supplies, a sensory reminder of the innocent world within these walls. "I'd like to see Principal Miller about my son, Kevin Thompson," Ethan said, his voice a little shaky, his hands fidgeting nervously with his purse strap. The secretary nodded, made a quick call, her fingers flying across the keypad, then directed Ethan down the hallway to a door with Principal stenciled in black letters across frosted glass. The hallway walls were a gallery of childhood, lined with vibrant student artwork and shiny achievement certificates, cheerful reminders of a normal, healthy, nurturing environment the school was supposed to provide, the very foundation of childhood safety. The sheer, overwhelming normalcy of it all made Ethan doubt himself momentarily. Was he overreacting to typical childhood behavior? Was Sophia right? Principal Miller rose from behind her desk when Ethan entered, a picture of calm professionalism, extending her hand with a practiced, welcoming smile. "Mr. Thompson, what brings you in today?" she asked, her voice smooth and composed, gesturing to a chair across from her desk. Ethan sat, suddenly feeling small and vulnerable, like a child called to the principal's office, feeling, illogically, like he was the one in trouble. "I'm concerned about Kevin," he began, the words tumbling out in a rush, outlining the disturbing pattern of bedwetting, the terrifying nightmares, and his son's fierce, unyielding resistance to the school bus, his absolute refusal to get on it. "And he's been arriving late to class," Ethan added, his voice gaining a little strength, a little urgency, as he recounted the growing list of distress signals Kevin had been exhibiting. "I received a call from Mrs. Peterson yesterday about his tardiness." The principal's expression shifted subtly, the polite interest replaced by a flicker of concern, a professional acknowledgement of a potential issue. "Yes, I'm aware of Kevin's tardiness issues," she confirmed, pulling up his file on her computer, her fingers clicking on the keyboard. "The late arrivals have become quite regular, Mr. Thompson, at least once a week for the past month." When Ethan, still trying to grasp at logical explanations, suggested that perhaps the school bus had been running behind schedule, Principal Miller shook her head firmly, unequivocally dismissing the possibility. "That's not possible, Mr. Thompson. All our buses have state-of-the-art GPS tracking systems that monitor their exact location and arrival times in real time. I can assure you, Bus 17 has been arriving at its scheduled time every single day." She turned her computer screen to show Ethan a log of precisely documented arrival times, a cold, hard, undeniable digital record. The digital evidence stared back at Ethan, a silent refutation of his theory, undermining his desperate attempt to find a rational explanation, leaving no room for interpretation, no space for doubt. Ethan felt his cheeks flush with heat, a wave of embarrassment washing over him. Without the bus running late to blame, Kevin's tardiness became harder, much harder, to explain away. I don't understand then," he stammered, his earlier conviction wavering, dissolving under the weight of the principal's authoritative gaze and the undeniable data. Maybe Sophia was right, he thought, the insidious seed of doubt taking root. Maybe it was just first-grade jitters, a normal, temporary phase, as she suggested. "Kevin used to love school," he said lamely, the words feeling hollow, meaningless, in the face of the evidence. The confidence that had propelled him to the school, the fierce determination that had fueled his actions, began to crack, replaced by a creeping, unsettling sense of self-doubt, a fear that he was overreacting, that he was the one who was wrong. He shifted uncomfortably in his seat, suddenly feeling awkward and out of place, like an over-anxious parent making a fuss over nothing, tilting at windmills of his own creation. Principal Miller's expression softened slightly, a practiced display of empathy. "Mr. Thompson, adjustment difficulties are quite common at this age," she said, her tone kind, understanding, yet carrying an undercurrent of professional authority that made Ethan feel foolish for suggesting anything might be amiss with the bus or the established school procedures. The transition to a more structured academic environment, the demands of first grade, can be challenging for some children. Her words echoed Sophia's dismissal so closely, so precisely, that Ethan almost believed them, almost let go of his fear. The principal continued, her voice smooth and reassuring. "We can schedule an evaluation with our school counselor if you'd like, a professional assessment to identify any underlying issues. But in my experience, these behaviors usually resolve themselves as the child adapts, as they become more comfortable in their new environment." Her tone was kind, certainly, but it carried a clear, unmistakable undercurrent of professional authority, a subtle message that his concerns, while noted, were likely unfounded, that he was overreacting. It made Ethan feel foolish, irrational, for even suggesting that something might be genuinely wrong, that there was a problem beyond the normal developmental challenges of childhood. Ethan nodded woodenly, his mind a whirlwind of conflicting thoughts and emotions, thanking the principal for her time, for her reassurances, however unconvincing they felt. As he walked through the hallway toward the exit, a heavy cloak of deflation settled over him, his paternal instincts, the insistent voice of warning, warring with the logical explanations he'd been given, the undeniable evidence of the GPS logs. The school felt achingly, crushingly normal, filled with the distant sounds of children's laughter echoing from classrooms, the vibrant colors of artwork lining the walls, a world of innocence that seemed miles away from the dark possibilities swirling in his mind. He began, once again, to doubt himself. Was he being overprotective? Was he making mountains out of molehills, as Sophia suggested? The sounds of a functioning elementary school surrounded him, a symphony of normalcy. A teacher's voice patiently leading a reading lesson, the cheerful clatter of chairs in a classroom, the rhythmic squeak of the custodian's cart on the polished floor. Nothing seemed out of place, nothing seemed amiss. As Ethan pushed through the front doors into the bright midday sun, the sudden transition from the dim hallway almost blinding, movement in the parking lot caught his eye, a flicker of motion that jolted him back to his heightened state of alert. Children were filing out of the school toward the playground for lunch recess, a supervised exodus, teachers monitoring their lines through the chain-link fence, their watchful eyes scanning the orderly progression. Something, a subtle detail, a gut feeling, made him pause, frozen on the steps. A heavy-set man in a blue shirt was holding a small boy's hand, leading him not toward the bustling playground, the hub of innocent activity, but away from the school grounds, towards the edge of the parking lot, towards something unseen. The child's bright red polo shirt and sandy blonde hair were unmistakable, even from this distance, a splash of vibrant color against the drab asphalt. He only caught a glimpse, a fleeting image burned into his mind, for a brief, agonizing moment before they disappeared around the corner of the building, swallowed by the architecture. But his heart, his primal, instinctual heart, recognized what his rational mind could barely process, could barely believe. Leo, his son, and the man who walked with that distinct, heavy gait, it looked unmistakably like Buford. Ethan froze mid-step, the world narrowing to a pinpoint of terrifying realization, his breath catching in his throat, a strangled gasp. Maternal recognition, raw and powerful, overrode all rational thought, all the logical explanations, all the GPS data. His son, who should have been safely in class, learning and playing, was leaving the school grounds with Buford, the bus driver, a man who had absolutely no business being at the school during the middle of the day. He surged into action, a surge of adrenaline coursing through his veins, propelling him forward. Sprinting across the school's front lawn, the manicured grass blurring beneath his feet, toward the corner where they had disappeared. His heart hammered against his ribs, each frantic beat a silent, desperate plea. Please let me be wrong. Please let be someone else. The gravel crunched loudly under his feet as he ran, the sound amplified in the sudden, deafening silence of his fear, his purse slapping rhythmically against his hip with each desperate, pounding stride. As he rounded the corner, breathless from both the physical exertion and the suffocating weight of his fear, Ethan saw it. A yellow school bus, that familiar, once comforting symbol, pulling away from a side entrance he hadn't even noticed before. The brake lights flashed briefly, a cruel, mocking red, as the vehicle accelerated, turning onto the service road that ran behind the school, a hidden, secluded route. Without a second's hesitation, powered by a surge of primal instinct, Ethan sprinted to his car, fumbling frantically with his keys as he slid behind the wheel. His hands trembled so violently, shaking with adrenaline and terror, that he had to make 2 attempts to insert the key into the ignition, his fingers clumsy and unresponsive. The engine roared to life, a guttural, angry sound, and he pulled out of the parking space with a screech of tires, the sudden noise drawing startled, bewildered looks from the teachers supervising the playground nearby. Ethan kept his eyes fixed on the yellow bus, a beacon of fear now, turning onto the service road, his knuckles white, bone white, as he gripped the steering wheel, his hands locked in a death grip. Every paternal instinct screamed, a deafening siren in his mind, that his son was in grave danger, and nothing else, absolutely nothing else, mattered but reaching him in time, intercepting them before it was too late. The service road was narrow and poorly maintained, a ribbon of cracked asphalt and loose gravel, with potholes that made Ethan's car bounce and rattle violently as he followed at what he hoped was a discreet, unnoticed distance. Dust rose in billowing clouds from the bus's tires, creating a hazy, opaque trail that made it difficult to see at times, obscuring his view of the vehicle ahead. The road curved sharply through a sparse grove of trees, the branches occasionally scraping, clawing, against the sides of his car as he navigated the tight, winding passage, the sound a dissonant screech in the tense silence of the chase. After what felt like an eternity, a stretch of time measured in heartbeats of pure terror, but was probably less than 2 minutes, the road opened to a small clearing, hidden from the main road by a dense screen of trees. A white camper van with gray stripes sat parked there, a solitary, ominous presence. The vehicle looked weathered, its paint faded, but surprisingly well-maintained, a mobile dwelling tucked away from prying eyes. The bus pulled alongside the camper and stopped, its engine still running, a low, rumbling growl. Ethan quickly parked his car behind a cluster of trees about 50 yards away, cutting the engine, plunging himself into a terrifying silence. He sat frozen, a horrified witness, watching the scene unfold through his windshield, a tableau of his worst nightmares come to life. The bus door opened with a hydraulic hiss, a sound he could almost hear despite the distance, a chilling punctuation mark in the silence. Buford stepped off the bus, his large frame unmistakable, even from this far away. Behind him, looking incredibly small and vulnerable, came Leo. Ethan's breath caught in his throat, a strangled cry, as he watched Buford take his son's hand, his large, engulfing Leo's small one, leading him toward the camper door. Leo's posture was stiff, rigid with fear, his steps reluctant, dragging. Ethan felt his entire body go cold, a wave of icy terror washing over him, as they climbed the metal steps into the camper. The door closed behind them with a definitive, terrifying finality that sent a shard of ice through his veins. Ethan's mind raced, a frantic, terrifying torrent of possibilities, as he stared at the white camper, now containing his son and a man he'd trusted implicitly, simply because he'd been a familiar, comforting fixture in the community for years. Why would the bus driver bring Leo to this isolated location, hidden away, during school hours? What could possibly be happening behind that closed door? His hands shook uncontrollably as he fumbled in his purse for his phone, dialing 911, his fingers clumsy with terror, nearly dropping the device in his haste. Each ring seemed to last an eternity, stretching time to its breaking point before a calm, professional voice finally answered. "Emergency services, what's your emergency?" "I need help." Ethan gasped into the phone, his voice breaking, splintering with fear and desperate urgency. "My son. I think he's been kidnapped. The school bus driver took him from school. I followed them. They're in some kind of camper van now. Please, you have to hurry. Please." The dispatcher's voice remained steady, a lifeline in the storm of Ethan's panic, a stabilizing force. "Sir, I need you to take a deep breath and tell me your name and location." Ethan forced himself to inhale a ragged, shaky breath. "My name is Ethan Carter. I'm on some kind of service road behind Westfield Elementary School. There's a yellow school bus parked next to a white camper van with gray stripes. My son, Leo, is in there with the bus driver, and he shouldn't be. He should be in school." "How old is your son, Mr. Carter?" "6. He's only 6 years old," Ethan replied, his voice catching, a sob threatening to escape. "The bus driver is a man named Buford. I watched him take Leo off the bus and into the camper. This isn't normal. This isn't right." The dispatcher continued asking questions, her voice calm and methodical, trying to guide Ethan through his fragmented, panicked responses, extracting crucial details from his frantic account, piecing together the horrifying picture. "Officers are being dispatched to your location right now, Mr. Carter. Are you in a safe place? Can you be seen from a camper or the bus?" "I'm parked behind some trees," Ethan said, his eyes never, not for a second, leaving the closed camper door, willing it to open, to reveal his son safe inside. "I don't think they can see me. Please tell them to hurry. I don't know what's happening in there." "The officers are on their way, Mr. Carter, but I need you to stay on the line with me. More importantly, I need you to stay in your vehicle. Do not approach the camper or the bus. Do you understand? This could be a dangerous situation, and we need you to remain safe until help arrives." Ethan mumbled agreement, the dispatcher's words a distant echo in his mind, though every paternal instinct screamed at him, a deafening roar, to abandon caution, to run to the camper, to tear down the door, to get his son. The dispatcher continued, speaking soothingly, her voice a calming balm, asking about Leo, about what Ethan had observed, about any other details he could provide, filling the agonizing silence. Each second felt like an eternity, stretching and twisting, as Ethan watched the silent camper, a sinister presence in the clearing, imagining, with horrifying clarity, what might be happening inside. Then he heard it, Leo's voice, frightened and high-pitched, a small, fragile sound carrying faintly through the thin walls of the camper, slicing through the silence. The sound sent a jolt of pure, unadulterated fear down Ethan's spine, a chilling wave of terror. He couldn't make out the words, but the tone was unmistakable, undeniable. Terror. "I can hear my son," Ethan said, his voice sharp, cutting off the dispatcher mid-sentence, his attention solely focused on the sound of his son's fear. "He sounds scared. I can hear him through the walls. Mr. Carter, the officers are just minutes away. Please stay in your—" But Ethan had already dropped the phone onto the passenger seat, the dispatcher's instructions forgotten, paternal instinct overriding all caution, all reason, all fear. He flung open his car door and ran, propelled by a desperate, raw energy, toward the camper, his footsteps crunching loudly on the gravel of the service road, a soundtrack to his terror. His heart pounded in his chest, a frantic drumbeat, blood rushing in his ears, a roaring in his head, as he approached the vehicle containing his son, the most precious thing in his world. Without hesitation, fueled by a desperate, protective rage, Ethan pounded on the camper door with his fist, the force of his fury and fear making the entire vehicle shake. "Buford, open this door right now," he demanded, his voice stronger, steadier. Then he felt a fierce, unwavering command. There was a moment of absolute, pregnant silence, a terrifying pause, then shuffling sounds from inside the camper, hurried movements, drawers closing, whispered words he couldn't quite make out, a frantic attempt to conceal something. The door swung open suddenly, revealing a startled, wide-eyed Buford, his heavy-set frame filling the narrow doorway, a barrier to the truth within. His shirt was untucked on one side, a small detail that screamed of haste, of interruption, his face flushed with what might have been surprise, or perhaps something else entirely, something darker, more sinister. "Mr. Carter," he exclaimed, his eyebrows rising in apparent, feigned shock, his voice a little too loud, a little too surprised. "What are you doing here?" He attempted to block Ethan's view inside with his body, shifting to stand more firmly in the doorway, a human shield. "Where's my son?" Ethan demanded, his voice sharp, laced with suspicion, trying desperately to see past Buford's substantial, obstructing frame, to catch a glimpse of his son. "Now, Mr. Carter, there's been a misunderstanding," Buford began, his voice taking on a placating, soothing tone, a sickeningly sweet sound that only fueled Ethan's fury, intensifying his resolve. Ethan pushed past him with a burst of strength he didn't know he possessed, the adrenaline of paternal protection, a raw, visceral power, giving him the force needed to move the much larger man aside, to breach the barrier. He gasped, a ragged, choked sound when he saw Leo. His son was sitting on a small bench built into the wall of the camper, his small body huddled, trembling. Tears streamed down his face, hot, silent rivers, his bright red polo shirt rumpled and untucked. His expression when he saw his father was a heartbreaking mixture of overwhelming relief and profound, heartbreaking shame, a look that shattered Ethan's world. "Leo, Kevin, come here right now," he called, his arms outstretched, a desperate lifeline to his son. Leo bolted from the bench, a small, terrified animal, and ran to him, throwing his arms around his father's waist, burying his face in his shirt, sobbing, the sound muffled against the fabric. The familiar, comforting smell of his shampoo, the apple-scented one he'd picked himself at the grocery store last week, mingled with something sickly sweet in the cramped space of the camper, a cloying, unpleasant odor that made Ethan's stomach clench. Ethan's eyes darted around the small space, taking in details with a heightened, almost hyper-real awareness that fear brings. Candy wrappers littered a small table, colorful evidence scattered like breadcrumbs. A digital camera sat on a shelf above what looked disturbingly like a narrow bed, a piece of technology out of place in this cramped hidden space. Curtains were drawn across the camper windows, thick and opaque, blocking out the outside light, shrouding the interior in a dim, unnatural twilight, hiding the activities within from the world. Buford raised his hands defensively, a gesture of surrender that felt false, stepping between Ethan and the door, blocking their only exit, preventing their escape. "This isn't what it looks like," he insisted, his voice steady, controlled, but his eyes darting nervously between Ethan and the service road outside, a telltale flicker of fear in their depths. "Leo wasn't feeling well. I was just helping him out. I was going to take him back to school as soon as he felt better." "Move away from the door, Buford," Ethan commanded, his voice low and dangerous, one arm wrapped protectively, fiercely, around Leo, holding him tight, the other reaching instinctively for his phone. His connection to help, which he realized too late was still in his car, a frustrating, terrifying realization. "Mr. Carter, you're overreacting," Buford said, his voice taking on an edge, a subtle threat, a warning. "This is a simple misunderstanding. I've been driving kids for 20 years. Parents trust me." Ethan was steeling himself, preparing to physically fight his way past Buford, to do whatever it took to get his son to safety, when he heard them, voices approaching from outside, firm, authoritative voices calling out commands. Relief, pure and overwhelming, flooded through him as he recognized what the voices meant. The 911 dispatcher had acted quickly, efficiently. Two police officers appeared at the edge of the trees, their figures silhouetted against the sunlight, weapons drawn, held at the ready, as they advanced cautiously, deliberately, toward the camper. "Police, step away from the door," an officer commanded, his voice clear and strong, moving steadily, purposefully, closer. Buford's face drained of color, turning ashen as he saw them, his carefully constructed composure crumbling. His hands slowly, reluctantly, rose above his head as he moved away from Ethan and Leo, stepping back into the cramped space of the camper. More sirens wailed in the distance, a mournful, urgent sound, signaling the approach of additional units, a confirmation that help was truly, finally, here. Ethan clutched Leo to his side, holding him tight, his body a protective shield between his son and Buford as the officers reached the camper steps. One officer kept his weapon trained on Buford, his gaze fixed and unwavering, while the other approached Ethan, his expression one of calm concern. "Sir, are you and the boy all right?" the officer asked, his eyes quickly scanning them for any visible injuries, any signs of physical harm. Ethan nodded, unable to form words past the large, suffocating lump in his throat, the fear and adrenaline leaving him speechless. Leo pressed his face harder against his father's side, his small body still trembling with silent, residual sobs, the trauma of the last few moments etched on his small frame. "Take them both out of here," the first officer instructed his partner, his voice low and urgent, never taking his eyes off Buford. "Get them to safety while we secure the scene." As the second officer gently guided Ethan and Leo away from the camper, leading them towards the waiting police vehicles, Ethan felt his knees weaken, buckling beneath him, with a wave of overwhelming relief and delayed shock. They had found Kevin in time. Thank God they had found him. But what exactly had they interrupted? How long had this been going on? The questions, dark and terrifying, began to surface. "This is all a misunderstanding," Buford protested loudly, his voice cracking, desperate, as an officer approached him with handcuffs ready. "I was helping the boy. He wasn't feeling well at school. Ask him yourself." Despite his protests, his face had taken on a sickly, grayish pallor, beads of sweat forming on his forehead, glistening in the harsh light, as the officer firmly guided his hands behind his back, securing the restraints. Ethan stood on the gravel road, holding Leo so tightly against him that he could feel his son's rapid heartbeat against his side, a frantic counterpoint to his own. He positioned himself as a physical barrier, a shield, between his son and Buford, watching with grim satisfaction as the officer secured the handcuffs with a definitive, metallic click. Justice, swift and immediate, was being served. More police vehicles arrived, their lights flashing silently in the midday sun, reflecting off the white surface of the camper in disorienting blue and red flashes. Officers emerged, purposeful and grim, some setting up a perimeter around the area, securing the scene, others approaching the camper with measured, deliberate steps, preparing to enter the heart of the darkness. Ethan recognized the detective's badge on an approaching officer, a middle-aged woman with short dark hair and eyes that seemed to miss nothing, eyes that had seen too much. The female officer knelt down to Leo's level, her movement deliberate and non-threatening, her demeanor calm and reassuring. "Hi there," she said, her voice gentle but not condescending, her expression kind. "My name is Officer Davis. What's your name?" Leo pressed himself harder against Ethan, his face half hidden in the fabric of his father's shirt, a small, trembling bundle of fear. "Leo," he whispered, the word barely audible, a fragile sound in the sudden quiet. Officer Davis nodded, maintaining a respectful distance, her gaze steady and compassionate. "Leo, that's a great name. Can you tell me what happened today? Why were you in this camper with Mr. Buford?" Leo stared at his shoes, his small body trembling visibly against Ethan, the silence stretching, heavy and suffocating, for several seconds, broken only by the crackle of police radios and the distant, unconcerned sound of birds singing in the trees. Ethan held his breath, unsure if Leo would speak at all, if the trauma had stolen his voice. When he finally did, his voice was so quiet, so fragile, that Ethan and Officer Davis had to lean closer, straining to hear him. "He wanted to take pictures of me, without my shirt," Leo whispered, the words tumbling out in a rush, as if he'd held them inside for too long, a dam finally breaking. "He does it every time he takes me from school. He said the candies were special, and I had to pay him back by keeping secrets." Ethan felt his knees weaken, his legs turning to jelly, as Kevin continued, his voice breaking with a fresh wave of emotion, the raw pain of betrayal and fear. "He said if I told anyone, they'd think I was a bad boy, and no one would love me anymore. That's why I couldn't tell you, Daddy. I didn't want you to stop loving me." Officer Davis's expression remained professionally neutral, her face a mask of calm, but Ethan caught the flicker of controlled anger in her eyes, a brief, fierce spark as she exchanged a knowing glance with her colleagues, a silent communication of shared understanding and grim determination. The officer's voice betrayed none of this emotion when she spoke again to Leo, keeping her tone gentle, reassuring, her focus solely on the terrified child. "Leo, you did nothing wrong. Nothing at all. And your dad still loves you very, very much. I can tell just by the way he's holding you right now." Across the clearing, Buford's protests grew louder, more frantic, as another officer read him his rights, his voice rising in a desperate crescendo. "This is preposterous," he shouted, struggling against the restraints, the metal biting into his wrists. "I've been driving for this district for 20 years. Everyone knows me. You can't seriously believe I would harm a child." His face had turned from pale to a mottled, angry red, sweat beading on his forehead, spittle flying from his mouth as he shouted, his voice thick with fear and outrage. Ethan turned Leo away from the disturbing sight, shielding him, protecting him from Buford's increasingly desperate, unhinged protests. The bus driver continued shouting as officers led him away, a pathetic, defeated figure, toward a waiting patrol car, his voice carrying across the clearing, fading as he was taken away. "I was helping him. He wasn't feeling well. This is a mistake." Officer Davis stood, her gaze steady, nodding to a colleague who approached with a gentle, compassionate smile. "Mr. Carter, Officer Chun is going to take you and Leo to a separate patrol car. We need to get both of you away from here, away from the scene." As Officer Chun gently guided them toward a waiting police vehicle, its lights flashing silently, Ethan glanced back at the camper, a white box of horrors. Other officers were donning latex gloves, their movements practiced and methodical, preparing to enter the vehicle, to search for evidence, to uncover the full extent of Buford's depravity. The systematic, professional way they moved, the grim efficiency, told Ethan, with chilling certainty, that this wasn't their first time handling such a scene, that this was not an isolated incident. The realization made his stomach clench with a wave of nausea, a sickening understanding of the depth of the darkness they had stumbled into. Through the open door of the camper, now surrounded by a hive of official activity, Ethan glimpsed an officer emerging with something in his gloved hand. He spoke quietly to a colleague, his expression grim, as he held up what appeared to be a digital camera, a piece of evidence, a silent witness to the horrors within. Another officer brought out what looked like a school backpack, but it wasn't Leo's, which was still presumably at school. The backpack was smaller, with a cartoon character Ethan didn't recognize, a cheerful, innocent image juxtaposed with the grim reality of the scene. His mind reeled with the implications, the horrifying possibility that there were other victims, other children. "Mr. Carter, please," Officer Chin said gently, his voice soft, guiding Ethan's attention away from the scene, away from the unfolding nightmare. "Let's get you and Leo somewhere quiet, somewhere safe." Ethan nodded numbly, his body moving on autopilot, helping Leo into the back seat of the patrol car. His son's small body was still trembling, though less violently now, the initial shock beginning to subside, replaced by exhaustion. He looked pale and drained, the adrenaline crash leaving him weak and vulnerable. Officer Davis approached the car window, her expression serious but kind, her eyes meeting Ethan's with a shared understanding of the gravity of the situation. "We're going to need both of you to come to the station for formal statements," she explained, her voice calm and clear. "It's important we document everything while the details are fresh, especially for Leo." Ethan nodded, struggling to process everything happening around them, the rapid, surreal unfolding of events. "Of course," he managed, his voice raspy, "whatever you need." As Officer Davis turned to speak with a colleague, her voice a low murmur, Leo looked up at Ethan with red-rimmed eyes, the exhaustion and fear evident in their depths. "Can we go home now, Daddy?" he asked, his voice small and tired, a simple, heartbreaking plea. "I want to go home." Ethan brushed his son's hair back from his forehead, his heart breaking, shattering into 1,000 pieces at the simple request he couldn't yet fulfill, couldn't grant immediately. "Soon, baby," he replied softly, his voice thick with emotion. "We need to help the police first, tell them everything, then we'll go home. I promise." The patrol car pulled away from the scene, tires crunching on the gravel of the service road, the sounds fading into the distance as they turned onto the paved street. Through the rear window, Ethan could see more officers arriving, evidence technicians setting up equipment near the camper, the area swarming with official activity. The school bus, that familiar yellow vehicle that should have represented safety, routine, the normalcy of childhood, now looked ominous, a sinister presence, surrounded by police vehicles, its lights flashing silently in the growing chaos, a silent witness to a terrible crime. Ethan held Leo close as they drove away, his son a small, comforting weight in his arms, his mind racing with questions he wasn't sure he wanted answered. How long had this been happening? How many other children had Buford targeted, had he preyed upon? And how had all of them, the parents, the school, the community, missed the signs for so long? How had they been so blind? The ride to the police station seemed endless, each turn, each traffic signal, stretching time in a way that made minutes feel like hours, an agonizing crawl. Ethan kept his arm wrapped protectively, fiercely, around Leo's shoulders, occasionally murmuring reassurances when he felt him tense beside him, a small tremble running through his body. The police officer driving them, Officer Chun, maintained a respectful, understanding silence, glancing at them in the rearview mirror with eyes that held a depth of compassion, eyes that had likely seen too much of the darkness in the world. At the station, they were led to a small interview room, a sterile, impersonal space with beige walls and institutional furniture that attempted comfort but achieved only functionality, a sad imitation of a welcoming environment. A box of tissues sat on the table, a silent acknowledgement of the tears that would likely be shed, alongside a pitcher of water and plastic cups. Leo refused to leave Ethan's side, clinging to him, climbing onto his lap as soon as he sat down in one of the padded chairs, burying his face in his father's chest. A social worker named Ms. Jenkins joined them, her presence a calming, gentle force. Her demeanor was kind, her voice soft and soothing, clearly practiced for situations involving traumatized children. She explained to Leo, in simple, age-appropriate terms, that they would need to ask him some questions, but that he was safe, that he could take breaks whenever he needed, and that his dad would stay with him the whole time, a constant, reassuring presence. While they waited for the detective, the lead investigator, Ethan, called Sophia, his voice breaking as he explained, in halting, emotional words, what had happened, what he had discovered. Her initial disbelief was palpable, coming through clearly in her shocked, stunned silence. "What do you mean Buford took him to a camper?" Sophia asked, her voice rising, escalating with each word, tinged with disbelief and fear. "That doesn't make any sense. Buford's been driving buses forever. Everyone knows him." "Sophia, I saw it with my own eyes," Ethan replied, his voice surprisingly steady, firm, in the face of her disbelief. "I followed them. Leo was in that camper with him. The police have arrested Buford, and they're gathering evidence right now." There was a long, heavy pause before Sophia spoke again, her voice smaller now, stripped of its earlier impatience and condescension, replaced by a raw, vulnerable fear. "Ethan, I didn't believe you this morning. I dismissed everything you were worried about. I'm so sorry." "I know," Ethan said simply, too emotionally drained for anger, for accusations, for recrimination. "I'm on my way," Sophia said, guilt evident in her voice, a heavy burden. "I'll be there as soon as I can." After ending the call, Ethan sat quietly with Leo, holding him close, stroking his hair, murmuring reassurances. The social worker, Ms. Jenkins, sensing the need for comfort and distraction, prepared some drawing materials for him, a small box of crayons and a pad of paper. Leo's shoulders gradually relaxed under Ethan's touch, the tension slowly draining away, though his eyes remained wide and weary, haunted by what he had seen, what he had endured. Each time the door to the interview room opened, a fresh wave of anxiety washed over them, a fear of the unknown. Principal Miller arrived at the station, looking visibly shaken, her usual composure shattered. Her normally impeccable appearance was marred by worry lines etched deep into her forehead and hastily applied lipstick, a small detail that spoke volumes. Detective Miller, the lead investigator, a woman whose presence commanded respect, brought her into the room where Ethan and Leo waited, a space that felt both safe and confining. "This is impossible," Principal Miller told the detective, shaking her head vehemently in disbelief, clinging to the logic of her systems. "All our buses have GPS tracking. We would have known if the bus wasn't on its designated route. The system alerts us if a bus stops anywhere unexpected for more than 3 minutes." Detective Miller shook her head grimly, consulting the notes on her tablet, the cold, hard facts laid out before them. "Buford tampered with the GPS unit on his bus," she explained, her voice low and even, devoid of emotion. "Our tech team did a preliminary examination. He installed a simple electronic switch that let him temporarily disable the GPS signal while keeping the unit in place." Principal Miller's face paled further as Miller continued, the horrifying implications becoming clear. The system would still show the bus at its last reported location, making it appear stationary at a school or designated stop. He'd then reconnect before returning to his normal route. It was a calculated deception. The detective's voice was matter-of-fact, but her eyes reflected a deep, unsettling disgust at the cold, deliberate nature of the crime, the betrayal of trust. "We never would have caught it without a physical inspection of the unit," she added. "It was professionally installed, hidden behind the dashboard panel. This wasn't amateur work." Principal Miller glanced at Ethan, her shoulders slumped with defeat, the weight of the revelation crushing her. Her eyes quickly dropped to the floor, unable to meet the gaze of the parent whose concerns she had so easily, so confidently dismissed, the parent who had been right all along. "How long?" Ethan asked Detective Miller, his voice barely above a whisper, the question hanging heavy in the air, thick with unspoken pain. How long has he been doing this? Detective Miller exchanged a glance with the social worker, a silent communication, before answering carefully, choosing her words with deliberate precision. We're still early in the investigation, Mr. Carter, but based on what we've found so far, this has been going on for some time, possibly years. The detective turned her tablet screen toward Ethan and the principal, displaying school attendance record for Leo and several other children, a damning pattern emerging from the data. Your son wasn't just being taken during lunch breaks, she explained gently, her voice compassionate. Buford would sometimes keep Leo and other children on the bus during morning drop-offs, drive to the camper, and then deliver them to school late. Ethan studied the screen, the names and dates a blur of horrifying confirmation, recognizing a pattern he should have seen weeks ago, a pattern hidden in plain sight. The late arrivals recorded in the school system matched exactly with the days when Leo's anxiety had been at its worst, when he had clung to Ethan, begging not to go to school. The children were instructed to tell their teachers they were late for various innocuous reasons: doctor's appointments, traffic, oversleeping. Miller continued, explaining the predator's methods. Given their ages, the teachers had no reason to question these explanations, especially since the tardiness was intermittent rather than daily and spread across different children. It was designed to avoid suspicion. Ethan's hands trembled as he processed this information, the pieces of the puzzle clicking into place with horrifying clarity. All those mornings when Leo had begged, pleaded, not to go to school, his small body racked with fear. All those late arrivals, dismissed as dawdling or adjustment issues. He had completely, tragically, missed what was happening, the darkness lurking beneath the surface of their ordinary lives. What about the other children? Principal Miller asked, her professional composure finally cracking, her voice trembling. How many are we talking about? We're still compiling a list, Miller replied, her voice grim. We're cross-referencing the bus route with tardiness records and behavioral reports from teachers. Right now, we're looking at potentially 8 to 10 children, but that number may change as we investigate further. It's likely higher. As Ethan sat, the weight of this information pressing down on him, the station door burst open and Isabella Garcia rushed in, her son Mateo clinging to her hand, his small face pale with fear. Isabella's face was a mask of panic, her normally tidy hair escaping its ponytail in disarray. She froze when she spotted Ethan across the room, recognition and horror dawning in her eyes simultaneously. I heard what happened, she said, her voice trembling as she approached. A parent from the bus route called me and told me. I remember our conversation this morning. She pulled Mateo closer to her side, the boy's eyes downcast, his shoulders hunched in that same familiar posture of fear and withdrawal that Ethan now recognized all too well. After I got the call, I sat down with Mateo and asked him some careful questions. He broke down crying and told me. He told me about what Buford had been doing. Mateo, a small boy with dark curly hair and solemn eyes, clung to his mother, nodding silently, confirming her heartbreaking words. Detective Miller's expression hardened with grim determination as she quickly arranged for another interview room and social worker, her focus shifting to the new victim. Knowing each new story would strengthen their case against Buford, would ensure he faced justice. As the evening progressed, the police station filled, slowly but steadily, with more concerned parents from the same bus route. Each family arrived with the same shocked expression, the same desperate questions etched on their faces, and increasingly, the same horrible, heartbreaking confirmations from their children. Ethan watched through the interview room window as families arrived, their faces a mixture of fear and dawning horror, feeling a complex mixture of relief that Leo wasn't the only victim, that he hadn't suffered alone, and a profound, aching sadness for the same reason, for the shared trauma, the violation of innocence. The detective returned to Ethan, her expression grim but resolute, a quiet satisfaction in her eyes at the progress of the investigation. With the evidence we've collected and multiple victims already coming forward, Buford is looking at decades behind bars, she explained, keeping her voice low. The legal consequence is a small comfort in the face of the damage done. Cases like these carry heavy sentences, Mr. Carter, especially with the premeditation we've uncovered. She glanced at Leo, who sat quietly on a nearby chair with a blanket wrapped around his shoulders, a small, fragile figure, then back to Ethan. You did this, Mr. Carter, she told him quietly, respect evident in her tone, in her gaze. Your instinct to follow that bus, your refusal to be dismissed, likely saved more than just your son today. You are a hero. Ethan nodded, too emotionally drained to feel any satisfaction from the praise, the words echoing in the surreal fog of the day's events. He had saved Leo today, yes, but where had his instincts been all the other days, all the other weeks, when his son had been suffering in silence, carrying this terrible secret alone? The guilt, a heavy, suffocating blanket, threatened to consume him. Detective Miller finished debriefing Ethan, her weathered face showing the strain of hours of intense work, both exhaustion and unwavering determination. After hours of coordinating the rapidly expanding investigation, sifting through evidence, interviewing victims and their families, she closed her notebook with a soft snap, tucking it into her jacket pocket. Mr. Carter, because of your actions today, she said, her voice low and serious, we've already identified 4 other children affected by Buford's predatory behavior. There will likely be more. She paused, her voice dropping even lower, ensuring their conversation remained private despite the bustling activity of the station, the constant movement of officers and distraught families. Based on what we found in the camper, the evidence is disturbing. We suspect this has been going on for. She paused again, clearly weighing her words carefully, the gravity of the situation etched on her face. A very long time. Years, Mr. Carter. The implication hung heavy in the air between them, a chilling testament to the darkness that had been operating undetected for so long. Ethan swallowed hard, fighting back a fresh wave of nausea, a visceral reaction to the thought of how many children might have been victimized over Buford's 20 years as a bus driver, a trusted figure in the community. A woman in her mid-40s approached them, her sensible bob framing a face lined with experience rather than age, her eyes kind but assessing. She wore a navy blue blazer over a simple blouse, a lanyard with an ID badge hanging around her neck, a symbol of her profession. Mr. Carter, I'm Dr. Renee Carter from Child Protective Services, she said, extending her hand, her handshake firm and professional, but not without warmth. I'll be the lead case manager for Leo and the other children involved. Ethan returned the handshake automatically, his mind reeling, suddenly overwhelmed by the daunting realization that this was just the beginning of a long, arduous process, a journey of healing and recovery. The adrenaline that had carried him through the day, the frantic energy that had fueled his actions, was beginning to fade, leaving behind a bone-deep weariness, a profound exhaustion, and questions he wasn't sure he wanted answered, couldn't bear to contemplate. What comes next? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper, the question directed at Dr. Carter. He cleared his throat, the dryness a physical manifestation of his fear, and tried again, needing to know, needing some sense of what lay ahead. Will my son ever be okay again? The tremble in his voice betrayed the raw, fragile fear he'd been suppressing for hours, the deep-seated terror for his child's future. Dr. Carter glanced around a crowded station, the scene of controlled chaos, then gently guided Ethan to a more private corner of the waiting area, away from the constant movement of officers and distraught parents, an island of relative calm in the storm. They sat on molded plastic chairs bolted to the floor, the unyielding surface a stark contrast to the emotional vulnerability of the moment. Children are remarkably resilient, Mr. Carter, Dr. Carter said, her tone professional yet deeply warm, a balance earned through years of walking families through their darkest moments, guiding them through the aftermath of trauma. Leo will need therapy, both individual sessions to process what he's been through and eventually some group work with other children when the time is right, when he's ready. There will be good days and difficult ones, ups and downs on the path to healing. Ethan watched through the glass of the interview room as Leo, his small figure dwarfed by the institutional furniture, showed his drawing to the child psychologist, pointing to something on the paper with a look of serious focus, a temporary escape into the world of art. From this distance, Ethan couldn't see what he'd drawn, couldn't penetrate the private world of his son's creation, but the psychologist's gentle nod seemed encouraging, a small sign of connection, of progress. The most important thing right now, Dr. Carter continued, following Ethan's gaze, her voice soft but firm, is that you found him. You believed him when he didn't even have the words, the capacity to tell you what was happening, when he was trapped by fear and secrets. Many children in these situations are never discovered, never rescued. Ethan turned back to Dr. Carter, tears welling in his eyes, threatening to spill over, a physical manifestation of the pain and guilt he carried. But I didn't know what was happening, he admitted, the guilt he'd been holding back, suppressing, finally breaking through, raw and overwhelming. I knew something was wrong. I felt it in my gut, but I had no idea it was this. Dr. Carter leaned forward slightly, her eyes direct and honest, compassionate. You know, many children in these situations are never discovered. The predators count on children staying silent, trapped by manipulation and fear. They count on parents dismissing behavioral changes, on schools missing the patterns, the subtle warning signs. But you didn't dismiss the changes in Leo, Mr. Carter. You listened to your instincts, you followed that feeling, despite being told you were overreacting, that it was just a phase. Before Ethan could respond, before he could articulate the complex tangle of guilt and relief, the station door opened and Sophia arrived, her face ashen and drawn, her eyes red-rimmed, a mirror of his own exhaustion and fear. She scanned the crowded room frantically until she spotted Ethan, a look of desperate relief flooding her features, then rushed to his side, her earlier impatience and dismissal replaced by a raw, palpable fear for their son. "Where is he? Where's Leo?" she asked, her voice rough with emotion, her hands reaching for Ethan for reassurance. Ethan pointed to the interview room, and Sophia's posture sagged with visible relief when she saw their son, safe and seemingly calm, engaged in the simple act of drawing. She ran a hand through her hair, which was uncharacteristically disheveled, a small sign of the day's turmoil. "Mr. Carter, Dr. Carter interrupted gently, standing to introduce herself, her presence a calming influence. "I'm Dr. Carter from CPS. Your son is with one of our child psychologists right now. They're just finishing up some preliminary assessment work to help us understand what Leo needs going forward, how we can best support his healing." Sophia shook Dr. Carter's hand distractedly, her eyes continually drawn back to the interview room, her focus solely on her son. "Can I see him? Can we take him home tonight?" "Yes, to both," Dr. Carter assured her, her voice kind and reassuring. "The psychologist will bring him out shortly, and Detective Miller has already told me you're free to take Leo home once the necessary paperwork is finished. We'll be scheduling follow-up appointments starting tomorrow to ensure Leo gets the support he needs." The next hour passed in a blur of paperwork and gentle questioning, a necessary bureaucratic process that felt surreal after the raw drama of the day. Detective Miller returned periodically with updates on the investigation, which was expanding rapidly as more officers were assigned to the case, the scope of Buford's crimes becoming clearer with each new detail. Dr. Carter explained the support services available to Leo and their family, outlining the options for counseling, both individual and family therapy, and connecting them with victim advocacy programs, resources that would help them navigate the challenging path ahead. Ethan felt physically and emotionally drained as he signed form after form, his handwriting growing progressively shakier, each signature a confirmation of the day's horrifying reality. Leo remained with Sophia, clinging to her, barely letting go of his mother's hand as they answered a few final, carefully worded questions from another officer, questions designed to be gentle yet effective. When Detective Miller finally confirmed they could take Leo home, a wave of overwhelming relief washed over Ethan, a physical sensation of lightness after the crushing weight of fear. "We'll need to speak with Leo again tomorrow," she explained, handing Ethan her card, a small piece of pasteboard that represented a connection to the world of law enforcement and justice. But for now, take him home and try to maintain as normal a routine as possible. Familiar surroundings and regular activities will help him feel secure again, Mr. Carter. Ethan nodded gratefully, tucking the card into his purse alongside the business card from Dr. Carter and the Victim Advocate, a collection of resources for the journey ahead. Sophia lifted an exhausted Leo into her arms, the boy's head resting heavily on his mother's shoulder, his small body a testament to the day's ordeal. Ethan gathered their belongings, his movements mechanical, automatic, as fatigue settled deep into his muscles, a profound physical and emotional weariness. The drive home was silent, the usual background noise of family chatter absent, replaced by the quiet hum of the car and the rhythmic patterns of light and shadow cast across their faces by the streetlights passing by. Ethan turned in his seat occasionally to check on Leo, who had fallen asleep almost immediately after Sophia had buckled him into his booster seat, his exhaustion finally overcoming his fear. His face looked peaceful in sleep, the worry lines that had aged him beyond his years temporarily smoothed away, a brief return to the innocence that had been so cruelly threatened. As they pulled into their driveway, the familiar sight of their house a beacon of safety and home, Ethan recalled the candy still sitting on their kitchen counter from this morning, a small, innocent-looking wrapper that had been the first tangible, unsettling sign of something sinister, something deeply wrong. A lifetime seemed to have passed since he'd put it there, questioning but uncertain. Now, there was no uncertainty, only a grim, heartbreaking understanding. He made a silent promise to himself, a solemn vow, to always trust his instincts where his child was concerned, to never again ignore the subtle, insidious signs that something was wrong, no matter how small, no matter who told him he was overreacting. Behind them, more police cars, their lights flashing silently in the growing darkness, headed toward the school, a somber procession, as the true, horrifying scope of what Buford had done began to unfold, revealing a hidden world of darkness and betrayal. In the back seat, Leo stirred slightly in his sleep, his eyes fluttering open for a moment, his small voice thick with sleep, a fragile sound in the quiet car. "Daddy," he murmured, "are we home?" "Yes, baby," Ethan replied softly, reaching back to touch his knee, his hand a comforting presence. "We're home, and you're safe now." As Sophia carried their sleeping son into the house, Ethan paused on the front porch, looking back at the quiet street where the bus had stopped this morning, a seemingly ordinary corner transformed into the starting point of a nightmare. The neighborhood looked exactly the same, peaceful, ordinary, safe. But everything had changed, irrevocably. The journey ahead would not be easy, the path to healing long and challenging, but they would face it together, as a family, one step at a time. And he, Ethan Carter, would never again silence the voice inside him that recognized, with unwavering certainty, when something was wrong with his child, no matter who told him he was overreacting. His instincts had saved his son, and he would trust them, always. Thank you for reading this story of a father's love and a community's awakening. If this story resonated with you, please consider subscribing to our channel for more stories of courage, resilience, and the unwavering bond between a parent and child.